always thought that being married for decades meant understanding each other completely. But a phone call from Joseph made me realize that wasn't the case for my husband and me.
I'm sorry, but it looks like it's going to be difficult to continue sending money for Mom's care.
What? The end of my marriage with Daniel was imminent. My name is Nancy. I've been married to Daniel for 30 years. We both got married at 25 and are now both 55. Over these 30 years of marriage, we've been through a lot. We used to fight nonstop when we were raising our kids. But once the kids grew up and left, our conversations completely stopped. The fighting stopped, but our relationship had grown cold. They say the more you fight, the closer you are. But now I wonder. Now we sleep and eat separately. Living under the same roof, we hardly see each other anymore. It's like living separately in the same house. When I go to pick up the tray of food I left outside Daniel's room, sometimes I find notes from him. But there are always things like,
"Today's meal was terrible. Make something better."
or,
"Take my suit to the cleaners tomorrow."
or,
"I have a business trip for a week. Get it ready."
I wish you could just say it directly. Do you really dislike talking to me that much? I felt sad. Despite everything, I still wanted to get along as a couple now that the kids are gone. It felt like I was the only one thinking this way, sighing through my days. The only thing keeping us together as a couple was Sarah, my mother-in-law. We started living with Sarah when our children left the nest. It's been 5 years since my father-in-law passed away, and Sarah has aged significantly. It worried us to leave her living alone. At first, it was just a bit of difficulty moving around due to age, but over the years, Sarah's capabilities diminished. Now she's completely bedridden. Sarah, still mentally sharp, always looks apologetic. For me, having lost my own parents already, I want to take care of the last parent I had. Even if she's my mother-in-law, I don't want her to feel sorry. I've often heard complaints about mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts from friends, but our home was different. Sarah is a wonderful person who helped a lot when raising the children was tough. I considered taking care of her as a way of giving back, and I've never felt it to be a burden. Moreover, with the increasing support from the government, it's not like I have to manage everything on my own. Yet there was something that still bothered me. It was about Daniel. Despite Sarah being his biological mother, Daniel hardly ever took care of her. In fact, he hardly even tried to see her. It was as if he had forgotten we were living together. I wanted to discuss things about Sarah, but knocking on his door got no response, not even an answer. When he came home, I tried to forcibly talk to him, but he completely ignored me and went straight to his room. I lost count of how many times I heard the door close and lock right in front of my nose. "I'm sorry, Nancy, for putting all the burden on you. If only Daniel had been more responsible." Sarah would apologize. "Don't apologize, Sarah. It's not your fault. And I don't mind it at all. Please stay healthy and live a long life," I would say, and Sarah would always cry and thank me. The thought of losing such a kind person as Sarah was unimaginable. Her passing was sudden and unanticipated. Daniel, who only glanced at my shocked state, proceeded with the funeral arrangements emotionlessly. The Daniel I saw after a long time didn't seem depressed at losing Mom. Rather, he appeared almost lively. When Sarah suddenly became critical, I panicked and called Daniel, but he cut the call short, saying,
"I'm busy at work."
Sarah passed away shortly after. No matter how many times I called, Daniel's phone was off. He didn't return until the next day at noon after hearing the voicemail. I was too stunned and angry to speak, but Daniel continued to ignore me until the funeral was over. At Sarah's funeral, our children showed up. Using this as an opportunity, Daniel communicated with me through our children for anything he needed. By then, my anger towards Daniel was greater than my sorrow for losing Sarah. Daniel treated Mom's passing as if it was just paperwork, without any sign of warning. Looking coldly at Sarah's relatives shedding tears, Daniel said indifferently,
"Well, it can't be helped, can it?"
Daniel's attitude was so cold. It made me want to ask, is he really her son? It was as if it was someone else's problem. The worst part was what he said to the relatives who offered condolences after the funeral.
I'm glad she's gone. She was a burden, being bedridden and all. Now I'll enjoy life freely with the inheritance she left,
he said with a broad smile. This angered everyone, including Sarah's younger brother, Richard.
Why are you so angry?
Daniel seemed genuinely puzzled by the relative's fury. He was like an alien to me. I was a mix of anger and disbelief, speechless at his audacity. Complaining about being burdened? He never did anything. He stayed in his room, hardly ever visiting Sarah's room. Even when I asked for help with her care, because it required strength, he ignored me. And yet he had the nerve to say that. Everyone knew I was the one taking care of her alone. They even helped me financially because I couldn't work due to caregiving. Daniel, at his worst, hardly contributed any money to the household. He paid for utilities and taxes reluctantly, but nothing else, not for living expenses or caregiving costs.
Just use Sarah's pension,
he'd say. Yet he had the audacity to complain about the meals, confirming that Daniel must be from another planet. No, it would be an insult to aliens to compare them to him. Everyone was appalled by Daniel's dreadful attitude and offered me words of apology. Richard even said,
You know, you can't divorce him.
All I could do was give a wry smile in response. A month had passed since Sarah's death. Life with Daniel remained conversationless. On a day when the caregiving for Sarah was gone and life felt dull, I couldn't even find the motivation to watch my favorite detective dramas. There was a phone call. It was from Joseph, Daniel's brother-in-law. Joseph had been living overseas for work. Given the time difference, he called late at night.
Hey, Nancy, it's been a while. It's night there, isn't it? Sorry for calling so late, but is Daniel around?
Hello, Joseph. Long time no see. I'm sorry. Daniel hasn't come home yet.
I see. I thought his mobile phone was off because he was at work.
There was something I had been curious about. It was about Joseph. Joseph had already been overseas when we got married. Since we didn't meet or talk much, I never really understood the relationship between Daniel and Joseph. But whenever they met, they seemed to talk normally, and I didn't get the impression that they were on bad terms. The same was true for Sarah and Joseph. I never heard that their relationship was bad, and whenever he came back to America, he always made sure to see Sarah. Yet Joseph didn't come back for Sarah's funeral. Apparently Daniel had contacted him, but he said he was too busy with work to return. Daniel was cold to Sarah, but Joseph seemed to get along well with her. That's why I found it so strange that he didn't come back for the funeral, no matter what. But I didn't intend to pry into their family matters, as it might be something between parents and children that I couldn't understand. Still, I thought maybe I should tell him about Sarah's final days. But before I could speak, Joseph said,
Sorry, but can I ask you to pass a message? Actually, I'm getting old too, and work is becoming difficult.
Joseph was naturally older than Daniel. He was approaching his 60s. It's not like the old days, when you retire at 60, but his salary was getting cut and life was becoming tough.
So, I'm sorry to say this, but it looks like I'll be short on money soon. I might find it difficult to continue sending the money for Mom's care.
Excuse me? Money for care? What was he talking about? I was puzzled, and Joseph also sounded confused.
You didn't know? I've been sending money for Mom's care and living expenses to Daniel. I don't know how much he gave you from it, but I was contributing $1.5K.
I've never received any such money.
What?
I was utterly shocked. Joseph was just as surprised by my reaction. I had a long talk with Joseph to understand what was happening. Joseph's story went like this. Joseph had been sending money to Sarah for a long time, but when she started needing care a few years ago, he began transferring it to Daniel. Even though Sarah appeared mentally sharp, Daniel, concerned about her ability to manage money due to aging, set up a new bank account for her, and Joseph had been sending money there. However, anticipating a tighter financial future, maintaining the same amount of support was becoming difficult. feeling obligated to contribute financially to the caregiving he had fully entrusted to us. Joseph had called to say he would not stop the payments completely, but requested to reduce the amount. But I was completely unaware of any remittances from Joseph. The expenses for Sarah had been coming out of her pension, and Daniel had not given me any money at all. I managed the living expenses with the money I had saved from part-time jobs and the assistance I received from Richard and others. I had no knowledge of Joseph's support.
I don't know where the money I sent went. I have a bad feeling about this, said Joseph.
Please wait, I will look into it, I responded and ended the call. Daniel hadn't returned home yet, and he finally came back just before dawn. The next day, after Daniel left, I entered his room. Let's get started, I said, pulling on my gloves. The music of a detective drama played in my mind. I was determined to find evidence. 1 month later. A month had passed since Joseph's call. 2 months since Sarah's passing. I found myself at a certain place. Watching from inside a car, I felt like a detective on a stakeout. The suspect seemed reluctant to show up.
Yeah, Nancy, maybe you should take off your sunglasses since it's night,
said my partner with a wry smile. That was Joseph, temporarily back in the country. Maybe I got a bit carried away. Sorry, I said, taking off the sunglasses and looking at the person next to me. Is it about time, Joseph?
If they stick to their usual routine, they should be taking a break now, so it should be soon.
Just as he finished his last bite of his sandwich, we saw them. There, they've come out.
Let's go.
Joseph and I got out of the car and confronted the 2 people who emerged from the hotel. Excuse me, you 2, can we have a word?
What, Nancy? Why are you here? We knew you always use this hotel, so Nancy and I were staking it out. What on earth are you doing? What? Joseph too? Why? Why are both of you here?
Well, there's a lot to talk about, isn't there? Let's go back to the house and discuss this more comfortably. Well, then I guess I'll be going. Joseph grabbed Daniel's arm as his face turned ashen. His determination not to let Daniel escape was evident. Seeing this, the woman who came out of the hotel with Daniel, his affair partner, Jessica, tried to leave. But we weren't going to let it go that easily. I grabbed Jessica's shoulder firmly. To the despairing Jessica, I offered a sly smile and said, "Let's talk slowly, at our place, shall we?" Jessica silently nodded along with Daniel. Good, she's cooperative. Let's have an explanation then. The 4 of us moved to our house. In front of the sofa where Joseph and I sat, 2 adults sat hunched and intimidated, Daniel and Jessica. I stood up, approached Daniel, and presented a banking card in front of his downcast eyes.
What is that?
Looks familiar, doesn't it?
No, I have no idea what that is.
I brought the card so close to his eyes as if to stick it there, saying, "You do remember, don't you?"
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's my bank account.
What about the $1.5 thousand deposited every month?
What was that again?
You know what it is, don't you? I tapped Daniel's forehead with the banking card.
I'm sorry. It's the money Joseph sent.
What did Joseph say to use this money for?
For Mom.
Right. This is the money Joseph sent for Sarah. So, Daniel, what did you use it for? The bank account's balance was a striking 0. The $1.5 thousand deposited each month were withdrawn almost immediately.
Well, what was it again?
All expenses for Sarah were covered by her pension, right? Daniel, you didn't contribute anything for living expenses or food except for the utility bills. Where did all the money go? Daniel remained silent as I pressed him for answers. Despite it not being hot, sweat was pouring down Daniel's forehead. As Daniel stayed quiet, I turned to Jessica, who sat quietly to the side. Jessica, you're wearing some lovely jewelry. Oh, well. Jessica, who appeared younger than me, was adorned with expensive-looking gemstone jewelry. At the mention of her jewels, Jessica couldn't hide her panic. Did you buy these yourself? Yes, I did. Even though you're unemployed and have no money. How did you know that? The moment Jessica exclaimed in surprise, I slammed the floor with my hand. Jessica jumped slightly. Don't pretend you don't know. The evidence is clear. I don't know anything. As if someone would wear jewelry without knowing its origin.
Nancy, let's calm down a bit, okay?
Regaining my composure at Joseph's calm words, I cleared my throat to settle myself. Then I presented a large envelope in front of the two. As I looked on in confusion, I emptied its contents with a flourish.
Yikes,
exclaimed Daniel. Understandably, he was shocked. Out came a pile of photos. Captured within were Daniel and Jessica on their dates. Some photos even showed them in more intimate, affectionate poses. I picked up a few and showed them to Jessica. Look at this. You're buying jewelry in this store with Daniel. That's the ring you're wearing now, right? This is... Here's another photo with a necklace. And another one showing you buying a brand bag. Not just photos, but there are videos of you buying these items and returning home. They're stored on a computer. Want to see? Jessica turned pale and shook her head vigorously at my words. And? I'm sorry. Daniel bought them for me. So you admit to the affair? Yes. I thought I was lucky to have caught a man who would buy me anything. How long have you been together? For a few years, but I really didn't want to. I hated having a relationship with a married man, but Daniel insisted so strongly. At her words, Daniel became flustered.
Hey, what are you saying? You're the one who wanted to be with me. You said you didn't care that I had a wife, Jessica.
Are you kidding me? You were the one who said, my wife doesn't love me anymore. She's just a housemaid, a caregiver for my parents. The one I love is you. If you won't be with me, I have no reason to live. Housemaid? Caregiver? He had the nerve to say that, huh? Noticing my glare, Daniel momentarily panicked, but then, unbelievably, glared back.
It's all Nancy's fault. Always busy with childcare, work, caregiving, abandoning her duties as a woman, and leaving me alone.
Daniel retorted, unreasonably angry. This made me furious. What? Don't be ridiculous. I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter. It's only natural for me to fulfill all these roles. I never neglected you, Daniel. In fact, it was you who neglected me, abandoning your duties as a husband, father, and son. Yet you dare to speak so arrogantly, you cheater. After 30 years of marriage, we've had our share of fights, but I've never felt such a rage boiling inside me. The nerve of his selfishness. Then it happened.
Hey.
Joseph's low voice resounded through the room.
Did you squander all my money on that Jessica?
Joseph asked. Although we didn't meet often, Joseph had always been a mild-mannered and kind person. What happens when such a person gets truly angry? The terror was so palpable that I could feel cold sweat down my back. And Daniel, the target of Joseph's glare, must have felt it the most. He was visibly pale and trembling.
Joseph, listen to me. There's no need to listen to your excuses. I've had everything investigated by a detective. Daniel, you quit your job and lived off my money for your affair. That's enough fooling around. How did you...
Just like I had earlier, Joseph slammed his hand on the floor. Daniel jumped several inches in the air. Tears welled up in his eyes in front of an enraged Joseph.
I told you, I've had everything investigated.
Joseph's tone was that of someone who had watched too many detective dramas. But Daniel, still tearful, just shook his head vigorously.
Daniel, you took early retirement, squandered your severance and my money, didn't you? Well, that's, and moreover, you didn't even inform me about Mom's passing to keep the remittances coming. That's the lowest of the low. I wanted to take care of Mom myself if I could, but I got a job I loved, and Dad and Mom were happy about it. So even though I was lonely, I thought working hard from across the sea was the best way to show filial piety.
Joseph wiped away a tear.
But I thought Daniel was actually taking care of them. I feel guilty. So even though it was tough, I kept sending money. I wanted to help financially since I couldn't be there. And then Daniel trampled all over those feelings. Can you understand the pain of not being able to attend your own parents' funeral? I'm sorry.
Joseph's genuine anger, coming from his usually mild-mannered nature, and then his tears. And Daniel, while seemingly repentant, quietly apologized. But Joseph's anger didn't subside.
Anyone can apologize. Show your remorse with actions. I'm so sorry.
Daniel suddenly bowed deeply in apology, but Joseph meant something else.
That's not what I need. Listen, Daniel, you're going to repay every penny to me. Then I'll pass it on to Nancy.
Really? Surprised, I looked at Joseph, who continued with tearful eyes.
Nancy, thank you for taking care of Mom until the end. I talked to Richard and others the other day, and it seems Mom was truly happy. You're a good person, she always said.
Is that so? Sarah always seemed apologetic towards me. I never knew she spoke so kindly of me behind my back. Remembering Sarah's kindness, tears welled up in my eyes. Daniel became frantic.
But Joseph, I've already quit my job, and I have no income. What about your severance pay? Well, I have a little bit left.
Unbelievable. How much money had Daniel spent on Jessica? It was clear that this path was headed for ruin.
If you're determined, you can find a job. Show me you're serious, Daniel. But that's unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. And Jessica?
What? Jessica was startled by the sudden demand.
Make sure you pay Nancy a proper compensation in the divorce trial. You knew Daniel was married, right? It's only fair.
Well, but... Daniel was lying prostrate on the floor. Jessica stood in shock. Joseph's lecture continued well into the night. Yep, I didn't even have to do anything. Joseph, you're such a support. Afterwards, after sending the dazed pair away, Joseph stayed at a hotel overnight and returned overseas the next day. He handed over the mountain of issues like our divorce compensation, and Sarah's inheritance to a lawyer. Thanks to a skilled lawyer, I got a smooth divorce from Daniel. Daniel and his affair partner initially lived together, but soon parted ways due to constant fighting and being penniless. Daniel somehow found a part-time job, but at his age, his income was modest. Living in an old apartment, struggling to pay back Joseph and barely making ends meet. He tried to seek help from Richard and others, but unsurprisingly, he was shunned by all relatives. Jessica also started working to pay the compensation for the divorce trial. She had been dependent on Daniel, so she's apparently struggling, but I don't care. As for me, I sold the house I received as part of the divorce settlement and moved to a new place with that money. Thanks to my children who always care for me, I'm managing to live, now finally enjoying my freedom. For a while, I planned to watch some old detective dramas online and reminisce about my time with Sarah. I'll look for things I want to do. That's what I was thinking, but now, I'm sitting in an airplane seat. Joseph said,
Why don't you come over here for a change of scenery and think about your future?
I thought going abroad was a bit of a luxury, but I decided to take up Joseph's offer as a reward for all my hard work. By the time I return to America, I'm sure I'll have found something I want to do. Everything will be okay, because life is still full of possibilities ahead.